As you can see, this morning I would like to talk about the idea of ordinary. And you might see and notice, normally he has a nice background on there. I wonder if that was on purpose. It was. I was looking at this and thinking, what background could I use? And I thought, just leave it ordinary. Nobody laughed at that. You shouldn't. It wasn't funny. I'm sorry. But I want to talk about ordinary because people normally talk about this idea of, he's just ordinary, or this is just ordinary. And they say it as if it's a bad thing. And I kind of want to flip that idea this morning and say it's not necessarily a bad thing to be ordinary. Jumping right in, you look at the Bible and you look at some of these Bible characters and you realize a lot of them were very ordinary people. You see, first off, the apostles. And I know it's easy to think, whoa, the apostles, you mean the guys that Jesus chose to follow him around for 3 years? The Peter who started the church or assisted in starting the church on the day of Pentecost, you're calling them ordinary. When you look at what they did and who they were before they started following Jesus, their professions, 4 of them, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, were fishermen. That was their job. And in this day, that was a pretty ordinary profession. Nothing extraordinary, nothing incredible. They were just fishermen. You keep going, you see Matthew, when he talks about himself being called by Jesus, and he talks about himself being a tax collector. And maybe that's a little bit of a more prestigious job than a fisherman, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that they had to have tax collectors. There had to be plenty of them there. So was it something extraordinary? He was just a tax collector. And then probably the least ordinary that we have, these are all the ones that we actually have and know what they did before they started following Jesus. But we have where Simon, not Simon Peter, another one was a zealot, which basically was a terrorist in that time. And while that is a little bit more than ordinary, it's still not something that you would look at and think, that dude should be a follower of Jesus. He should be something huge in the church. It's just not something super out of the ordinary. They were pretty ordinary guys that became followers of Jesus. And then you see David in the verse that Nathan read for us, how he tried on the armor of King Saul and he couldn't wear it. He was just a young kid. He was a fairly ordinary kid. We do have where he talks about killing a lion and killing a bear, and that's pretty impressive, I'll have to say. But all in all, he wasn't just extremely big in stature when we meet him. He wasn't just the most incredible guy when we meet him. He was fairly ordinary. And then finally, Mary and Joseph. You see where when Jesus is going to his people and they're talking about him in almost a negative way, and they say, "Is this not the carpenter's son? Is this not his mother, or is not his mother called Mary?" And you just kind of see the inflection. Is that not the carpenter's son? They're thinking, why is this guy a big deal? So they're saying, why is this guy supposed to be special? Because these are his parents. His parents aren't impressive. They were ordinary. They were ordinary people. But you look at what they did, and they did extraordinary things. But what's amazing is how they did it. You look at Peter. Peter went from being a fisherman to preaching the first gospel sermon. He went from catching fish to being one of the biggest leaders in the church. How did he do it? What did he actually do in Acts 2? When you really break it down and look at what Peter did, not what God did, giving him the ability to speak in tongues where everyone could hear him, what did Peter specifically himself do? And basically what he did was he told the story of the past 3 years of his life. He got up and he talked about Jesus. He got up and he talked about what he had been through with Jesus and what happened to him. That's pretty ordinary. It's a wonderful thing, but how many times has it happened since? Every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, and every Wednesday night, all over the world. So when you start talking about, was it something extraordinary, something incredible, he pretty much did what people do every Sunday. Nothing extreme. Then you look at at David. The first thing that, everybody thinks David, you think David and Goliath. It's probably one of the most popular stories in the Bible, even among those who are not Christians, don't even believe in the Bible, but they know this story because it's one of those stories that people use as inspiration all the time. But when you look at what he really did, he put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. He used a slingshot. Something that he had probably done thousands of times beforehand, something that had been done probably billions of times beforehand and billions of times since. It just happened to be against a Philistine, a giant that he killed. So what happened was unbelievable. It was incredible. But he did something that he had done over and over and over again. In reality, it was pretty ordinary. And we know that Mary and Joseph, while they might have been ordinary people, they gave birth to the man that would save all of mankind. And yes, childbirth is an incredible, beautiful thing, but without it, none of us would be here today. So if all of us experience it, I'd say that's pretty ordinary. So what they did was pretty ordinary, but they brought the Savior of mankind into this world. There's such small actions in the grand scheme of things, but they come out to such big results. And I feel like so much of the time people look for movie moments. And this is something that's kind of a little bit hard for me. It's clear in my head, but it's hard for me to understand or to explain in a lot of ways. But of course, because of the person that I am, the first thing I look to is sports movies. And you look at things like, you can't see all that well, but the Karate Kid, he's doing the crane kick. I do it, but I don't want to embarrass myself. But it's this amazing moment where his legs hurt, he can't do it, and he's all the chips are down, and he just does something incredible, and he wins the day, he wins the tournament, and it's just a wonderful scene. You look at Rudy. I've never been a fan of that movie. Don't stone me, but. It's the story of a plucky little kid who he finally gets the opportunity at the end of a game to go in and gets a sack for Notre Dame. And, it's so emotional. And, you see the picture of him being lifted up by his teammates, and it's just incredible to watch. You have Miracle, the hockey movie about the Olympic team that beat the or the Soviets in not the finals, but the semifinals, whatever it was, and the scene where they win, and the coach is so emotional. He goes into the hallway. He doesn't even go to celebrate with his team, and he just celebrates by himself, and he sits down. He's just so amazed, and it's just such a powerful moment. Or even before that, when he gives his speech, one of the better speeches in sports movies that you're going to see, and it's just such a wonderful moment. It's so exciting. Or what I think is probably the most underrated and forgotten sports movies of all time, Coach Carter. I love that movie. But at the end, when, these movies have been out for a long time, so I'm sorry if I'm spoiling any of them for you. But, they don't win the championship. They don't get what they're looking for. But this really hard-nosed coach that they've had problems with all season because he's just so strict, he finally has that moment where he tells them, "I'm proud of you. You accomplished so much more than what I thought you were going to." And it's just, I'm not going to lie to you. I watched most of these clips just to make sure I was saying the right things in the office. And I was about tearing up just watching these because they're just such powerful moments. And this isn't a sports movie, but because we talked about it a few weeks ago, I threw in The Pursuit of Happiness at the end, where he gets this job that he's been working for, and he runs to his son's daycare, and he picks him up and he gives him a hug. And it's just such an amazing moment. And that's kind of what I mean when I say movie moments. People look for these so much in their life. They want these big, just incredibly beautiful moments in their lives. And, you look at these, and if someone were to watch these, I've seen all of these movies, so I know, the storyline of all of them. If you just saw these moments, they probably wouldn't mean all that much. Sure, some of them are pretty cool moments, and you'd still think, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool," but you don't know the story behind it. That's what makes these so special, is because you see their journey to get to this moment. You see what all they go through, the things that they face to get to this moment. And just like we looked at with these Bible characters, they're very ordinary. The Karate Kid, one of the most famous scenes in it is the wax on, wax off, that thing. And he's just waxing a car, but that's how he's practicing to get to the point to where he is. It's very ordinary. And everyone wants to get these incredible movie moments, but to get them, it's very ordinary to get there. And we look for these moments and we look for these things, but again, I'm a big sports person, so I want to tell you, this is my favorite college basketball player of all time. Even some of your hardcore Duke fans probably do not remember this guy because he was not the most extraordinary guy. He was about 6'5", which he's going to be a lot taller than me, but compared to the people he was playing against, not super tall, not super strong or big. He wasn't known as the best shooter. He wasn't known as the best scorer, but he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He was one of those guys, he never turned the ball over. He never made a bad decision. There was nothing extraordinary about him as a physical specimen or his game or anything. He just did what he was supposed to do. And he ended his career as a consensus All-American and with a national championship. And you compare that to, if you follow college basketball at all, you compare that to the guy that Duke had this year that's 6'8", tipping 300 pounds and could literally put his chin on the rim. I'd say that's pretty extraordinary. And honestly, if I had to pick a team, I'd probably pick Zion first, but he would be a very close second. He did ordinary things over and over and over again. And he was one of the best point guards I think Duke has ever had. So we look at this idea of we want to be something extraordinary. We want to look for these movie moments, but when it really comes down to it, ordinary is outstanding. It seems like such an oxymoron to say that. It seems like it should be completely different, but these ordinary things culminate into something absolutely incredible. And you look at things like prayer. We look in James where it says that the effective fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And it talks about Elijah. And notice what it says here. Was a man with a nature like ours. Makes it a point to say he was nothing special. He was just like us. He's nothing extraordinary. But it talks about how he basically controlled the weather. I mean, obviously he prayed to God and God controlled the weather, but it stresses how incredible and extraordinary prayer is. But what is prayer? You have a conversation with God. That's not extraordinary. I mean, we have conversations every day. At least I hope you do. And I hope you pray every day. So is it something out of the ordinary? No, it's by definition, it's something that you do consistently. But the effects of it, the final result of it, is something that is absolutely outstanding. You look at evangelism, watching someone who can open up the Bible with someone else, have a Bible study with them, and that lead to a conversion. Someone who can rightly divide the word of truth to break down everything and explain God's word to people and lead them to salvation. That's an outstanding thing. That's an extraordinary thing. But that does not happen without ordinary, everyday, personal Bible study. No one has ever just been able to open up the Bible and know exactly where to go to without working on it beforehand, without studying on their own beforehand. I mean, it's just like any sporting event. No one's able to go out and be successful at any sport without practicing at it. And it's the same thing here. It is something extraordinary, but it comes from something very, very ordinary. And then preaching. I want to stress this. What I am doing right now, what people do every Sunday from the pulpit, it is nothing outstanding. I am standing up here and talking. Ask my wife. I do that a lot. It's not extraordinary. It's pretty normal. What is so much more impressive is, I'm going to read this poem to you, and this is just half of it. It's a pretty long poem, but it's by a guy named Edgar A. Guest. I'm not much of a poetry guy, but this is by far my favorite poem. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one should walk with me than merely tell me the way. The eye is a better pupil, more willing than the ear. Fine counsel is confusing, but example is always clear. And the best of all the preachers are the men who live their creeds. For to see good put into action is what everybody needs. I can soon learn how to do it if you will let me see how it's done. I can watch your hands in action, but your tongue too fast may run. And the lectures you deliver may be very wise and true, but I'd rather get my lessons by observing what you do. For I may misunderstand you and the high advice you give, but there's no misunderstanding how you act and live. I am standing up here talking. That is not something extraordinary. What is something that is outstanding is living this every single day, is living the Christian life every day. I think if you take a moment to think of the most influential people in your life, and I'm lucky enough to say that my preacher growing up was one of them, and I think of three men that were the most influential because they are head and shoulders above everybody else. Not just because it's the number three, it's just because those three were so much more influential to me. One of them was, I was the first child born when this preacher got to Fulton, Russ Crosswhite, and he was the preacher until 2 or 3 years ago. So he was there for a long time. Obviously, my father and one of my basketball coaches when I was a freshman, sophomore, who also happened to be a preacher at a small congregation in Fulton. And I think about the influence that they had on me. My coach, his name was Coach Ramey, Brady Ramey. I think I maybe heard him preach once or twice. Don't remember what he preached on. I heard Russ preach hundreds and hundreds of times. I don't think I could tell you a single sermon that man taught. I don't think I can tell you a single Bible class that I sat in with him. And my dad, like me, he talks a lot, but I don't think I've ever heard him preach a sermon. That's not what I remember from those guys. What I remember is how they lived their life day to day, how they interacted with me, how they interacted with the people around them. That's what made the influence in my life. That's what changed my life completely. Nothing that they said from a pulpit, it was how they acted. And I think people, and I had the tendency to do this before I became a minister, but people have the tendency to look at preachers and look at ministers and think they are more than or they are special, and we are not. I can promise you, you've met me. You know that I'm nothing special or nothing more than you are. So it's nothing special to stand up here and do this. But what is special, what is extraordinary, and what is outstanding is to live your life the way that you're supposed to every single day. To live it with consistency. That is when ordinary becomes outstanding. When you do the small things over and over again, and it provides outstanding results. And it's so easy for us to say, I'm not good enough with words to have a Bible study with somebody and to teach them these things, or I'm not special enough to be a big part of this church, or it's so easy to look at ourselves and say we aren't enough to do this as an excuse to not do the things that we were supposed to do. But you look at what the people in the Bible did. We talked about movie moments, and you look at the movie moments in the Bible, like David slaying Goliath. He threw a stone. Something that is very ordinary. And you say, yeah, but David, Peter, all these people, they had God on their side. Yeah. So do we. There's nothing extraordinary about what they did. So the idea that you are not special, you are not extraordinary is no excuse for us to think anything less of ourselves or anything that we can't do in God's kingdom. Because ordinary things add up to outstanding things. And I guess if you were to look at what the opposite of ordinary would be, I think great would probably be what you would come up with. You talk about somebody who is ordinary, and then you talk about greatness. You talk about these great people. Do something when you get home. Google great people in history and see some of the names that pop up. Two that really stuck out in my mind, Tiger Woods and Lance Armstrong. They were listed in the greatest people in history. Now, you might have mixed feelings about some of them, and I think Tiger's doing pretty well right now, but look at some of the things that they've done in their lives. Lying, cheating, adultery. Everyone wants to be great. But are these the people that you want to be in the company of? You know, Alexander the Great, his name literally had great in it, and he was killed by the people around him. Great is not the most outstanding thing in the world. Do you want to be remembered for your accomplishments or the kind of person that you were? The things that you did consistently, the way that you acted consistently. Not something that you did every once in a while that you were really good at, or not something that, you did one time that was extraordinary. Because you can be whatever kind of person you want to be, and you do something incredible once, and you're remembered as this great person. But were you really great? And I think about people like my dad. My dad has worked for the phone company in Fulton for I don't know how many years. I mean, he's never done something outstanding or incredible. I mean, I'm his son, so you can tell. He's not the most incredible and great person in the world. I would never hesitate to say my dad is a good man. That means so much more. When you die, do you want to be remembered for your accomplishments? Do you want to be remembered for being great? Or do you want somebody to say, they were good? That means a whole lot more. So we go into the coming week and we think, what can I do to be a better Christian? And at the end of the day, do ordinary things. Ordinary Bible study. An ordinary conversation with God where you tell him the things that you tell God your desires. You tell him the things that you want. You tell him the things that you need. You interact with people in a very ordinary way, in a very consistent way, where you are kind and you are loving, and they see God by the way that you treat them. How can we be a better Christian? Be ordinary. That's something you don't normally hear, but when you do it consistently, you do it the right way, ordinary is outstanding. And maybe you are the kind of person that chases the movie moments, the greatness, these incredible things. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But if you've lost yourself in chasing after that and you've kind of forgotten what it takes just to be good, if you need to repent of trying to be something, be in the company of these great people instead of in the company of good people. If you have heard the gospel for the first time and you'd like to have your sins washed away, it's a very ordinary thing to have someone basically push you underwater. But the effects of it are absolutely outstanding. If you'd like to have that now, we ask that you come as we stand and we sing.